Takeaways from J.D. Vance's new book Communion, on faith and his political ambitions, and there is a lot to unpack here. So Vice President J.D. Vance just dropped a brand new memoir, titled Communion, Finding My Way Back to Faith. This is his second book. His first, Hillbilly Elegy, made him a household name, and this one comes at a pretty interesting moment, 18 months into his vice presidency and right as the 2028 presidential race is starting to take shape. And yes, people are already talking about Vance as a Republican frontrunner for that race. So this book? It reads a lot like a political manifesto wrapped in a spiritual autobiography. Let's start with the headline everyone is going to be talking about. Remember back in 2021 when Vance called certain Democratic women childless cat ladies? A comment that came back to haunt him in a big way during the 2024 campaign? Well, in this book, he owns it. He calls it his words the dumbest thing he's ever said. Boneheaded is exactly the word he uses. He writes that the comment was intentionally provocative rather than illuminating and that it ended up completely distracting from the actual point he was trying to make, which, he says, was that American society is becoming, quote, pathologically hostile to having kids. He even frames it as a moral failing, writing that he fell short of the church's call to respect the dignity of every life. That's a pretty significant mea culpa for a sitting vice president. And speaking of the church, a big chunk of this book is about Vance's Catholic faith, including a moment that turned a few heads, his visit with Vatican officials in Rome earlier this year. Now, this came just weeks after Pope Francis publicly criticized the Trump administration's mass deportation policies. Vance was, by his own admission, unsettled by the meeting. He writes that the Vatican's position on immigration felt generic, full of what he calls trite platitudes, and that as the most senior Catholic in the U.S. government, he expected more. He doesn't spare Pope Francis from the critique either, writing that this vagueness was true of Francis, of his predecessors, and will be true in the future. Bold words. Now here's a fun data point buried in this book: the word babies appears 33 times. That's almost as often as Donald Trump's name, which shows up 40 times. That tells you something about where Vance's head is at. He dedicates a significant portion of the book to falling birth rates in the West, arguing that Christianity is basically the cure. He points to Israel as the only advanced economy not facing a decline in native-born population, and credits its religiosity for that. He writes that world leaders privately confide in him their fears about pension programs going bankrupt and struggling to recruit young people for military service. He also mentions something very of the moment: young staffers describing their lonely situationships, those casual, undefined relationships, as evidence of a deeper cultural problem. On the personal side, Vance gets surprisingly candid about his wife, Usha. He reveals that he actually fell for her while he was in a long-distance relationship with someone else during his first months at Yale Law School. He broke things off with that other woman to pursue Usha, writing that everyone else was like a dim light bulb set against Usha's radiance. And here's the part that might surprise people: Usha is a practicing Hindu, and Vance credits her, a non-Christian, with helping bring him back to his Christian faith. He writes that her quiet support of him going to church gave him, quote, permission and inspiration. The book ends, on a deeply personal note, with Vance writing about the death of his close friend Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist who was assassinated last September. Vance calls Kirk his best friend and closest confidant in the world of politics. And in a moment that ties the book's themes together, faith, family, and mortality, he writes that Kirk's widow, Erica, told the Vances between sobs that she regretted having only 2 children with Charlie. Vance and Usha, who had long debated having a 4th child, are now expecting one. One life was stolen from us, he writes. But another was given. Whatever you think of J.D. Vance politically, Communion is a revealing window into the mind of a man who very clearly has his eyes on the presidency and who believes that faith, family, and a higher birth rate are America's path forward.